So now we're going to move on to some general questions for the panel.
I think that there's a lot of work and quite a bit of luck in all of this. This is a process that started, as I mentioned, thinking about it, probably since the mid-1990s, early 80s. The first stages of development was we already had a concept. We had done some work with an architect and had a sense of how much space, the area that we were exploring in terms of what the location would be. So we had very definite and specific ideas of what that concept was going to be, and we started to explore then funding options. And we were very fortunate that in 2007, we received a first grant from the city of Philadelphia under Mayor Street of $1.5 million allocation, which was incredibly generous, not only because of the amount and really launching this project to a possibility, but also because it allowed us to use some of that money for pre-development work. And one of the first things that we decided to do at that point was we need to demonstrate, the value, the feasibility, and what are the services that this entity is going to be. We knew we wanted to just expand on our core programming of 40 years, but what additional components and elements would this entity have that satisfy community needs, but at the same time looking at the mixing of how is this project going to be viable moving forward. And that feasibility study was very informative, as you saw, and also kind of reinforced that we were walking in the right track. That very early stages involved identifying potential partners, talking to a lot of people that could help promote, not only promote the idea, but push the idea to potential sources. For example, very early in the process, Councilman Dan Savage made contacts. We made contacts with Senator Tartaglione, and we started to proceed to pursue a RACP grant, which was successful. And all of these are kind of, as I said, lots of luck and little miracles that happen in the way. We were doing our due diligence. We were doing all the work that we needed to do. We were putting teams together. We were demonstrating that we had the vision and the ability and the capacity to do this. But if you have gone through a RACP process, you know how political it is, how all of the stars need to align, and in our case, it happened, and we got a $5 million allocation, which is quite significant for a project that was projected to be, $10 or $11 million. And all throughout this process, we continued to pursue funding from other sources. We did a very intensive individual campaign with community individuals, with funders, with foundations, with corporations that knew the work, that we did, and we continued to pull partners from and through PIDC to help us think and guide the process. Once we looked at all of the numbers and we knew that we still had, we're going to end up with a gap of about $3 million, we knew that the only way of getting there was through new market tax credits. There's no way that an organization our size in a community like the community that we serve would be able to raise $3 million from the private sector. So that understanding and that knowledge allowed us to pursue that path. So we met with this process that is being explained here, we met with a number of city potentials, Chase, PNC, PIDC, Reinvestment Fund, and the Nonprofit Finance Fund, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We met with consultants in New York, we met with consultants in Boston, et cetera. We also identified LISC as a potential partner, or LISC identified us as a potential project that they wanted to connect with, and LISC was instrumental as well with that $75,000 grant to provide additional capacity and expertise within the team. And that's how we were able to recruit Gabe Canuso from D3 to help us. We had worked with ASA as a developer until that point, but ASA did not have new market capacity understanding and knowledge and previous experience, and it is a complicated process. So we identified that as a gap, and fortunately through LISC and the expertise that they provided to the team, we were able to then continue to put all of the pieces together. So with Gabe, you want to talk a little bit more about your particular contributions at that point?
Well, I'd like to point out just a little clarification, because Carmen continues to call it luck, but I'm going to say that it has a lot more to do with your mission and your tenacity. I mean, that was serious hard work over at least 10 years to pull all these pieces together. So in terms of luck, I would say we were fortunate to be able to work with Carmen on this project. We, through LISC, through Carmen, I think we came on board in March of 2014, and it was very clear that while there were a few moving parts on the capital side, that it really was but for the new market tax credits to be able to make this project a reality. And I think at that time, working with LISC, working with Carmen, the legwork that she's done with the CDEs, it really did become a little bit of a perfect storm where we were able to really strengthen the project, both from the fundraising side, but also the pro forma side. I think that helped make, I guess, with our involvement and with our recent completion of Oxford Mills, which was a very complicated new market and historic deal, maybe help bring a little bit of capacity to the team. And I think that at that point we were, again, with sort of the perfect storm, seeing that very fortunate to be supported by PIDC and PNC. So that to start to pick up that that speed through the CDE's initial involvement was fantastic. So I think that was significant. I think there were a couple other key pieces that were really important. Carmen had done an amazing job at raising capital from the community, but there was only so much that we could really raise. So there was a few other additional pieces, one of which was to be able to make this project work was to sell at least one of our properties. And again, through the perfect storm, another nonprofit came in and wanted the building as part of the development of the community.
Another piece of luck?
So all these pieces came together, I think sort of the right team, right time, PIDC, PNC, and LISC sort of all behind it. And then with 10 years of sort of legwork that was done, it's helped make our job a little bit easier.
Partnership was really important. You're going to keep hearing that on this project. There was numerous steps and numerous players and numerous times where people had to come in. And to Carmen's point, there was a little bit of luck in the timing as far as when the project, in the early stages, the city had issued this cultural and commercial corridors bond program that allowed us to give a grant sort of at the early stages. That is not a resource we always have, but we are always receptive to trying to find resources and connect people wherever we can. But it was good that we were able to sort of grant that funds up front to pay for some of those early pre-development costs, and also it allowed us to sort of coach and work with you through that process. But I will say that the partnership is hugely important. I'm curious, how many folks in the audience are nonprofit organizations? Show of hands. Okay. And how many folks here are private developers? Okay. So talk to each other. I really think there's great opportunity, and this is maybe for our mission at the Commerce Department and for neighborhood economic development, but I think this is really hard work, as you're seeing, by these complicated models that I still don't quite understand, but and for a nonprofit who is mission-based, it's really sometimes important to have somebody that can come at, can help merge your mission with a sort of revenue-making development. And in this case, Gabe was able to help Taller and as a consultant on the project. So I think either that kind of partnership or an actual equity partnership where you're really able to merge the project with mission and profit making down the road is, I just think that's going to help, spur these types of developments on because they are complicated. Again, the government's role is to stimulate and incentivize development, where the market isn't quite doing it on its own. And so that's what we're always trying to do. We're always tweaking sort of the resources and the way we can assist and do that. Always open for input on that. But we need to, it's going to take all of us to make that work.
I guess the one thing that I would add is that there was a lot of coordination needed on this project. There was, so the property was under agreement, but it was a public property, and so we had to coordinate with the city's public property department for them to approve the sale. Prudently, they don't want to approve sales for projects that aren't going to happen. So we had to demonstrate that all the financing was there, and this was about to happen before they would approve it. And then all the funding sources come with their own time frame and their own strings and their own reimbursement schedule. And so for each one of them, we had to determine whether a bridge source was needed or whether we would be able to get that funding or upfront at closing so that it could go into the construction account and be dispersed directly. And so, the RACP grant had expired and we needed to get an extension letter, and that caused, that was just another hurdle that we had to get over. The Cultural and Commercial Corridors grant was funded on a reimbursement basis, but that doesn't work with New Market Tax Credit because all the money has to be funded upfront at the day of closing. So there's a coordination with no fewer than 3 city departments. It all ended up working beautifully, but it wasn't without a lot of communication and partnership.
PNC had a relationship with Carmen for a long time before the New Markets concept was even floated. And I looked at my calendar. I think our first conversation directly was in October of 2012, which was obviously many, many years into Carmen's path. But then still 3 years before we ultimately closed. And as part of trying to evaluate whether I thought Taller was finally at the point of moving forward, it really does circle back to the elements that Charlotte mentioned earlier. So when we had our initial conversations, I think one of the comments at that time were you still had about a $2 million gap apart from the potential New Markets investment. And so we discussed the strategy around what she was going to do to be able to fill that from a fundraising perspective. We obviously kept close tabs on her, but at the same time, from a pure New Markets investment perspective, it was, we'll revisit this, we'll check in 6 more months. So that's what we did for quite some time. And then the thing that I thought that really kind of kicked it into full gear was the local LISC office, Dana, pulled together a stakeholders meeting with a lot of the partners. A lot of board members from Taller were present. Wendy and I came. LISC obviously was there. Reinvestment Fund participated. And we all sat down together, and I think at that point your gap was $200,000. And $200,000 and the New Markets, of course. So that was where we thought, I think we finally have a place to get started because we had full faith in Carmen's ability to round up the last 200,000. And Wendy and I, of course, Gabe was in that meeting, so we finally also started having like concrete budget numbers. Like we knew somebody with a developer's eye had been evaluating this project budget because in concept, obviously, we knew what she wanted to do. It was a lot more than what Taller currently had with their 2 buildings and their operations. But having Gabe come in and be able to put really solid construction numbers into us gave us a lot of faith that our budget was good and that this is something that could really get done. So moving on from there, we knew Carmen and her organization was debt adverse, which is wonderful. However, if we have the structure chart back up, even though she raised all of that money for the A note, and it was grants or bridge loans of grants that would ultimately, not need to truly be repaid from a permanent financing perspective, she was about to borrow 10 million in QICs. And there, as a function of the program, you have to have a certain debt service associated with it. I think, George, we ended up with an interest rate that was less than 1%.
It was.
But we had to still take that number times 10 million, where she's making interest-only payments for 7 years, and ensure that this new expanded pro forma that Karma was putting together with operations that are bigger than anything Talier's done previously could support that, you know, still nominal interest rate, but debt service for the next 7 years. So that's where Wendy and I spent a lot of time, you know, evaluating their pro forma and making sure they understood the technical aspects of the new markets and the expenses associated with that during the course of compliance. I think that was part of our underwriting analysis that gave us also additional comfort that we were going to be able to make this deal work, and as part of that is getting a tax opinion from your tax counsel. So, you know, it all came together, and it took a lot of partnership and coordination, because what we would often do is Wendy and I would work on some numbers and we'd send them to Gabe and Carmen and say, do you think you can do what we think we need you to do for these new markets budgets? They'd say yes, and we're like, okay, send them to Resnick, let's get some projections together. And then, you know, the Resnick team would be able to send over projections that would get over to George. George would explain it to their board. George would start forming his nonprofit entities that we needed, and it was just a whirlwind of energy to get there. And this is excluding all of the effort that Wendy and the city were putting into making sure all of the grants were in place for when we were ultimately going to close. So it's amazing. You have to be perfectly coordinated for a new markets financing. And yes, I agree with Gabe that it took Carmen's patience and tenacity, but there was absolutely luck involved in how this finally came together, because I think everyone involved was so proud and relieved when we finally got done, and they're in the ground, and we're excited to be celebrating in a couple months, but it really, it was a special project.
I mean, I think that, as Gabe mentioned, having a clear understanding of the numbers and the projections and how the pro forma was going to work moving forward, and having, you know, realistic, you know, as realistic as you can project over 10 years numbers was very critical to, number one, understand the gaps in still fundraising that we needed to do, but also in being able to provide a solid base to respond to the questions about, you know, feasibility that all of the financial institutions have on us, and our own questions of whether we're going to be able to manage this moving forward. You know, this is the largest, you know, more involved expansion that our organization has ever done, and we need to have enough confidence that these numbers are realistic for us, so that we can, you know, push them forward and have a, you know, a reality test that meets our vision of our project. You know, I think that one of, I mean, the lessons is that you have to knock on so many doors, and so many of them are going to close on you. You just keep knocking, and, you know, if your project is responding to needs, to realistic needs, if you think that you have a project that, you know, and you have reality testing, right? I mean, there are other people that, like me, thought that this was really important, positive project that is going to be transformative to this community. Then if doors close, others are going to open, because the, you know, the product that you have is a powerful product, and you know, and you do have to have tenacity and patience and longevity to keep pursuing this inch by inch. So I don't think I knew that it was going to take so long. You know, and I think that you know, tenacity has paid off. You know, maybe in our early development phases there were, you know, some expertise that we could have brought to bear that maybe would have speeded up our thinking and our process a little bit, but I'm not sure that there is anything significant that we could have done differently. And, you know, and the thing is that the timing of things, you know, we got the first grant in 2007, and then the first allocation of RACP came, you know, 2 years later, so there was a gap there. By the time we had, you know, $6.5 million and had passed the 50% funding mark, you know, 6 years had passed in all of that time. And I'm not sure that we could have secured that any sooner or, you know, made anything to fasten that process.
Any other comments from panel members?
Gabe, anything?
I would say, I think, you know, just a couple things to point out is really recognize who your stakeholders are and make sure that you're not, that you're really communicating with them and understanding what their needs are and making sure that you're in constant communication. Obviously, with a project that took this long, if you set this aside and moved on to something else and didn't keep your stakeholders in tune with it, it could have you know, died a long time ago. I think that was an important part. Obviously, sticking to your mission, that's of course significantly important. But one of the things I think is really important is the reality check that you talked about before. Is that I think that when sitting down with all of your stakeholders, whether it was the city, whether it was the CDEs, investor, potential donors, that you were very forthright about the reality of your economics. I think that's going to be that's truly important, because I think folks want to be very bullish. They want to show numbers that may be completely unrealistic. I think it's best to be real with yourself, with your organization, and make sure you're projecting that to everyone that you're talking about. It makes the conversation that much easier.
One of the issues is the issues that Wendy mentioned in terms of, so under the direction and the push from Councilman Dan Savage, the transfer of the land, at least was in paper in the city, to transfer that lot of land to Taller, and that's because that agreement was there, even though the city still had ownership of the land. We were able to do, you know, the pre-development work that needed to get done. So we needed to ask permission, but we were able to do the geotechnical analysis and environmental studies as part of the pre-development. And there was, you know, environmental issues that were discovered. So, you know, as you get closer then to you know, to building, that environmental issue became a hurdle that needed to be overcome. And, you know, but, you know, with these incredible partners, everybody committed to getting the project done, you know, every hurdle, we just needed to, you know, deal with the alternatives we had, and we finally found solutions for them. You can see there's funding, $1.5 million from the city, another 1.3 million grants also from the city. There's private dollars, and there's the market tax credit, and there is the value of the land that is not included here. That, you know, we assessed, and it was assessed at $600,000. That is part of the match as well.
This was definitely one thing that we did correctly. I think we did a lot of things correctly, but we tackled that very early on in the process. And in fact, the real estate was acquired directly by the newly formed Qualic B, so you didn't have to worry about a double realty transfer tax, number one, and it just made things a lot easier. So we were able to get ahead of that, but oftentimes the sponsor entity will already have the real estate, and we find out we need a separate legal entity to do the new markets. So you get into issues of realty transfer tax and other things as far as all the issues about transferring real estate to a separate legal entity. So in this case, I think we did a good job on that.